Okay. Oh, well, we'll start. Okay, we will reconvene. And we're on the home stretch, people, in terms of today. So our next submission's number 7, which is on page 330. And we've got John Lawson online. John, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yep.
Good. Am I able to share a screen?
Okay, thank you.
So where it is, but
you've got 20 minutes, John. We'll let you know after 10 because you can then consider if you leave enough time at the end for any questions that members may have.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to find the right page to share. I'm not sure that I should have done this earlier because I wanted to show you what the current State Highway 23 looks like in terms of crashes on it. And I'm looking at the wrong bit. And
yeah, we don't have anything. It's just a black screen at the moment.
Okay. I'll try screen and see if that works better.
Look at us.
Is that working? I'm not sure. Are you able to see that?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, good. Sorry about that. So yes, these the maps which are available on the Ministry of Transport's website, they're crash analysis system maps. You're probably familiar with them. And it just shows the current problem. And the point I'm trying to make is that we've got about 3,000 people living in the Whangaroa Raglan area at the moment. And the proposal in Future Proof is to increase it to something like 12,000. And the problem, as I see it, is that you're still looking at doing a corridor analysis along what is presumably State Highway 23, the corridor. As these maps show at the moment, we've got quite a major problem with crashes. It's probably most of you know the road. It's quite winding. It's quite narrow. It doesn't have any median barrier. And it does have quite a number of crosses like the one that I've inset in the bottom right corner, which show that the black marks on this map show deaths and the red marks show serious crashes over the last 20 years or so. So it is quite a problem. And moving on to the next picture I wanted you to look at. This is taken from Google Maps, and it's showing the sort of problem there is even at the moment with logging trucks, which we've increasingly got coming from our forestry, the winding road with poor visibility, the yellow no overtaking lines, but the logging trucks actually acting quite legally because the highway code says that you can overtake a cyclist even on yellow lines, but you should give them 1.5 meters space, which is what the truck's doing. The only problem is that anything coming around the corner is going to have problems. And if you're going to increase the amount of traffic on the road, presumably by 4 times or so, then you need to be looking at this sort of thing as part of a corridor study. And there's also the problem of the resilience. I've put in a quote from the draft regional land transport plan here, which is saying that the major resilience hotspots include all these other places and the strategic routes such as Raglan State Highway 23. And it's probably also made relevant to mention Carfia State Highway 31, because I've marked that route in light blue on the map on the right-hand side. And if the stream, which I've marked with a dark blue arrow, were to have a major storm event and wash out the bridge on State Highway 23 there, then the State Highway 31 via Carfield would be the only route still open, apart from using the harbour or using air supply or whatever. So there's a vulnerability there. We did experience last May the vulnerability on the current road when it was washed out for a month or so, and traffic was recommended to go around via the green route, heading up to Wainaro and that way. Other traffic did use the shortcut, which is the yellow route, but that's in a pretty poor condition. And it's not really a very good option. So resilience is one of the other problems which I expect that will be looked at in a corridor study. And then there's the problems with what happens when you get to Hamilton or start from Hamilton, depending which peak it is. So this is Dinsdale roundabout, and I don't know whether you know it at all, but there are already tailbacks at that roundabout in all directions. And if you increase the traffic coming in on the Raglan Road, which is the road going out on the left-hand side of this picture, then you're going to increase the capacity problems at that roundabout. A major expense, probably the best way to do it would be to put in a flyover. Well, probably the best way to do it would be to get everyone onto a bus, and then the number of vehicles would be pretty similar to what they are now, probably even less, but because you can fit many more than 4 times the number of people in a car into a bus. But the problem is actually getting them into the bus, and at the moment there's no plan at all to switch people to buses apart from a hoped for hourly service, which might eventuate, probably not with the current government cuts that have just been made, but sometime in the future there is that idea. But even an hourly bus wouldn't reduce the traffic very much. It would, at the moment, about 2% of the traffic between Raglan and Hamilton goes by bus, and to increase it to hourly, you maybe might hope for something like 10%, but there's still the other 90%. And if you're increasing the population by 4 times, then again, it's still a problem, unless there's some other idea for getting more people onto the buses. The other junction is the one up near the railway bridge. As you go up the Massey Greenwood Street junction, so that's a problem. There's also the problem with the coming into Hamilton further out with the Fotofota Road meeting the Newcastle Road. Probably traffic lights might solve that one. So that's basically the message that I want to put over. And maybe if you want to, maybe if I stop sharing my screen, we can see each other and move to, actually, I'm not quite sure. I'll stop sharing.
Oh, no.
Okay, so.
Thanks, John. And I'm just opening it up for any questions from committee members.
Of what?
Sarah.
I'm not sure that you can see. Oh, probably I need to click the camera, do I?
Can hear you.
We can hear you, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, John. Apologies if I missed this in your presentation. I was just, firstly, thank you for your presentation and your submission. You talked about 12,000 more people in Raglan, Whangaroa. Can I just confirm where that number was from? Is that from?
That's from one of the future-proof proposals for 2070, I think. So we're looking, what, 45 years ahead?
Okay. Cool, thank you.
And the point I was making is that in the rest of the areas which are labelled for expansion, already corridor studies have been done, but in the case of Raglan Whangaroa, they haven't been done. They're to be done at some unspecified date.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Any other questions from members? No, there's no further questions, John, but would be helpful if you could supply that presentation that you've just taken the committee members through.
Okay, so just send it to the person who sent me the information about the meeting, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, good. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to the got submission 39 on page 332 of our agenda, and that's Hort, New Zealand. Leanne Roberts, and members in front of you, you should have a copy of a memorandum from Hort, New Zealand. Welcome, Leanne.
Kia ora.
So you have 20 minutes. Leah will ring the bell at 10. You don't need to stop then, but it's just an indication if you're leaving a wee bit of time, if you want to, for members to ask any questions that they may have.
Thank you.
Otherwise, over to you.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for having me here. I don't plan to take all of that time, so hopefully you can earn yourselves a quick glass of water, a cup of tea. I'll briefly read through my memo. Apologies, it went in later last night. We had a couple of things pop up in the last couple of days that took my attention. So the memo was just to support our oral submission, and it's off the back of previous submissions that we've made to future-proof strategy drafts. And so from our position, it's creating an artificial and a non-evidence-based productive food production value separation of land use classes 1 from LUC 2 and 3. We think that the draft future-proof strategy needs to be consistent in its approach and terminology of LUC 1, 2, 3, rather than splitting these off and using different definitions to make sure it's clear and consistent with documents such as the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land. And that policy statement, LUC 1, 2, 3, elite class soils, highly productive land, however you want to refer to them, are considered as a single class, and they have like a single set of considerations that must be given to them. Currently, the Waikato Regional Council hasn't given effect to the NPS HPL yet. Apologies if you don't like the acronyms, let me know and I can change that. Partly because you need to complete mapping, and most councils are in the same position, so you need to understand to the right degree what are your soil resources, what are your LUC 1, what are your LUC 2 and 3. That hasn't been done yet. I think that's scheduled for later this year, but until you understand what you have in those resources and where they're located, it wouldn't be very sensible to make plans for what can occur on those, especially if there's other higher order documents like the National Policy Statement sitting there that are going to dictate what can and can't happen. Growers use all classes of land, so while LUC 1 is promoted within the draft future-proof strategy as having a special status or significance, in practice, all 3 classes are used interchangeably. And the main driving factor that growers are faced with is actually land availability, and in areas where there isn't either current development or there might be sensitive activities that are occurring on the boundary edge. They need to do this to achieve an effective rotation. Soil health is an incredibly important part of growing, and in order to look after your soil, you need to be able to rotate your crops. So often you need a lot more land available to rotate through than you'll be using at any one time for production. We also challenge the evidential basis for this approach. In developing this, we're interested to understand what soil scientists and growers and grower groups you talk to. There's a really excellent group in Pukekohe called the PVGA, which you do have a relationship with and able to go and talk to, and to our knowledge, you haven't approached them, and that we would have thought would be prudent, and this would really impact them. This region does recognise the Pukekohe hub that does creep into this region as well as Auckland, and that's an area of national significance for food production. majority of that land happens to be LUC 2 and 3. So that's just so you're aware why those three classes are considered together. So in support, we submitted some previous evidence that had been done by a soil scientist, my predecessor, Jordan Landers, and a planner that we work with, Vance Hodgkinson. Most of the facts and information and basis that we use there hasn't changed. The science hasn't changed around those things, which is why I've chosen to submit them in support of this submission today. And we would like to extend an invitation to take the committee or anybody from council out around the growing areas, bring you out to see our PVGA to get a better understanding of the practicalities of how soils are used, what growers need, what the approaches are, and what might sit behind some of our submission and our growers' feedback. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, no, thank you. So I'll open it up for questions from members. David.
Can I just check I've understood your submission? So this morning we've had some criticism, some direct and some not so direct, that we've potentially been too conservative and almost being more conservative than the NPS in our approach. What I'm gathering from you that you are concerned that we've just lumped 1, 2, and 3 together in our approach, or that we are not being conservative enough in terms of protecting 1, 2, and 3 land?
What we're concerned with is that there's a separation of land use class 1 and a different set of parameters and conditions, protections around land use class 1 than there is 2 and 3. And if we look at the minimum that's required, LUC 1, 2, 3 have the same protections afforded in the NPS HPL. And on our read of this document, we saw this as very much giving effect to the NPS urban development, but perhaps lacking some of the things that the NPS HPL provide for. And while those two separate documents, they sort of are quite complementary, because one's providing for your urban activities and one for your rural. And what we are often finding, especially with like looking for future urban zoning areas, or when you have increased activity at the borders, is that reverse sensitivity happens, and that reduces your productive capacity of that soil. So it's very important that all productive soil is regarded in the same way and treated in the same way, and there's not a different set of expectations, because it's impractical to be able to pull them out in practice. So you could often have, if you have your mapping done to enough detail, for example, one paddock that may have more than one soil type in it. So how would you then practically give effect to what you're signalling in this document if that was to flow through to another document, say, for example, a regional policy statement? And that's where our concern sits, just sort of sets out something that wouldn't be achievable.
Thank you. That's heaps clearer.
Okay. Carolyn.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your submission. As a farmer and person living in a rural area, I see that we have issues around staffing shortages. Often that is because there is no housing, certainly in our Waikato area. Have you got any suggestions or solutions to overcoming that issue?
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to look into it. One thing that I note is a lot of the housing development that's occurred, if I use a safe example across the border in Auckland, for example, in Pukekohe area, isn't providing housing for workers for the local area. It's actually providing housing for people to commute to Auckland. And given your proximity, you may find that that happens as well, a little bit of urban creep, a lot more remote working. So it wouldn't necessarily provide the housing to enable fixing the problem that you might be after. There may be things that might need to be considered around seasonal worker accommodation or different ways around that could happen. There are some really good examples, especially down towards Central Otago Way or other areas that use a lot of seasonal workers or RSE workers, on how that's provided for. That also flows through to maybe provision for other temporary workers, for example, backpackers and things like that. So, but horticulture is one of those areas where we tend to use like a large labour force seasonally, and they tend to be the mechanisms that we use to help provide for our growers to be able to meet their staffing needs. And I appreciate it's probably a little bit different from pastoral farming, where you may have fewer but more permanent staff. Thank you.
No, doesn't look like there's any further questions. So thanks very much, Leanne. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Now, it's 3:30. Our next submitter's not due to 3:50, which is the Taupori East Industrial Cluster. Yes, sorry. We'll carry on and hear from you, and then we'll move to SL1, and then depending on the time, we might deal with the report that's still on the table in terms of out of sequence developments. So, but we'll see how time goes on. Yep. Okay, welcome, Michael.
Kia ora tātou panel members. We have a couple more people coming along. They've just arrived, so that's very timely. Yes, so look, my name's Michael Campbell. I'm a planning consultant and I assisted in the preparation of the submission. So we're here today to talk to the subcommittee in relation to a submission, I think number 43, and this really concerns land in Taupori.
Okay, just to clarify for members, Leah's just here handing out the document that we have just received,
Sure.
which has been printed for all members. So we'll have that in front of us. And also just clarifying, there's the 20-minute allocation. The bell will go at 10, but that's just an indication to leave some time towards the end for any questions that members may have.
Thank you very much, and we will certainly endeavour to leave a good space of time for questions. So perhaps before I jump into things, I thought it might be useful just to introduce the people sitting before you, and then what I intended, I was going to speak very briefly, and then one of the other parties will also speak. So as I say, my name is Michael Campbell. I'm a planner. On my left, I have Scott Keane, who is a project manager. Mr. Keane has been involved in advising the landowner, not only in relation to the site that we're here to talk to you today in terms of the, what I would deem, I guess, the Taupori East Industrial Cluster, but the land to the west of that in Taupori. Directly to my right, I have Mr. Phil Lang as a barrister, and he will be speaking after me. Just to clarify, mainly some comments around the out of sequence criteria. And then further to my right is Rudy Van Dam, who is one of the landowners. Rudy hadn't intended to speak, but he is available to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Okay,
so
thank you.
I understand the submissions are taken as read, so I wasn't intending to work through that. I just wanted to really cover a couple of the key points just in terms of context. I understand Mr. Keane had forwarded a map, the particular area of land. It might be worth just sharing that with the committee so that I can speak to that. I don't know if that's able to be shared.
No, we don't have that before us at the moment. Was that sent? When was that sent?
10 minutes ago.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Is it the same one in the submission?
Look, while it's, let's keep going because time is of the essence. And so, look, this submission really is a joint submission by Rudy Van Dam, John Veth and Mike Jones, and it comprises a group of landowners that make up the land that's identified in figure 3 on the submission, and I trust that the committee has access to that. This land is identified within the Waikato 2070 development strategy as the Taupori East Industrial Cluster. I'll just pause for people just to visualise that and see that they've identified that on the submission. So Mr. Van Dam is, just for a bit of context, Mr. Van Dam is also the owner of a parcel of land that is located contiguous. Oh, that's helpful. Thank you. So the land we're here today is the land in the red outline. Mr. Van Dam also owns land adjacent to the existing service centre, which is identified to the west on the left-hand side of that map, which comprises a mixture of residential and some industrial zonings. For clarification, Mr. Van Dam has been working closely with the Waikato District Council to resolve an appeal by providing for a comprehensive planning assessment and structure plan that covers that land to the west. And I just raise that for context, and probably just in terms of just noting that Taupiti is in somewhat of a state of dynamic change. There's you'll be aware through the Waikato District Plan, there've been areas that have identified for greenfield residential development. Mr. Van Dam's land sort of rather elegantly sequences into that land between the existing approved urban area and the state highway. And so this is, I guess, what we continue to consider to be a continuation of the Waikato 2070 strategic framework. In that regard, the submitted land holdings resides within the industrial area on either side of State Highway 1, which are noted as being in a development horizon for 3 to 10 years. Given that the Waikato 2070 was released in 2020, much of this land is already within that identified development timeframe. In addition, live zoning has already occurred through the plan process for land to the west of the submitters. So just picking up on the points I raised. The panel will be aware that we also provided an economic report by Property Economics. And I guess what that identifies is that based on their assessment, they consider to be that the particular identified land is economically efficient, and it will meet a demand for business land. It's strategically, it's well located in terms of the existing infrastructure, in terms of contributing to placemaking in terms of Taupiti with a growing employment base, but also a growing population base. There's an opportunity for people to live, work and play in their community. But at the same time, there's also the opportunity for the land to get access to what is an existing resource vis-a-vis the motorway and its ability to, I guess, provide access to a wide range of markets. In terms of the site, it's as I indicated, it's got good access. We're here today to get the piece of land identified in the future-proof documents, but we acknowledge that there will be a range of steps that need to be gone through in the future in terms of dealing with the actual planning constraints and opportunities with this site. And similarly to the process we've gone through for the land to the west, we would anticipate in the future that there would be a structure plan process and eventually a plan change process. And that would involve very likely a very detailed analysis in relation to the constraints of the site. The work that's previously been undertaken hasn't identified any fatal flaws, but I think through that structure process and what we've experienced with the proposals for the land to the west is it's likely that you would develop a precinct plan that would deal with things like managing the ecological impacts on any streams in terms of offsets and riparian margins, managing things like the timing of infrastructure, and also access to the roading network. We're cognizant of these locations draining into the Waikato and the obligations of Te Turi Whai Mana in terms of creating enhancements to the environment. And I think any future structure planning would be able to look at that in terms of ensuring enhanced stormwater quality treatment. And there are a range of technical ways that that can be achieved. That's probably all I wanted to cover in terms of just a bit of context and framework. And then I was going to hand over to Mr. Lang to talk about the sequencing. And then I think we're happy to jump into questions.
Oh, that's fine. Welcome, Phil.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Chair, and for committee members. Nice to have the chance to talk through this. I'll try to be as brief as I can with time being short. The paper that has been delivered to you about the out of sequence and unanticipated development considerations, I don't think it's of good value, good use of the time if I troll through that item by item now. One of the key themes in it, though, is taking up a point that Mike just raised, that some of the considerations in here are really a bit fine-grained for this stage of the planning process. It seems to have been a set of criteria developed mainly to assist territorial local authorities when they come to either rezone or consider development proposals. And some of them, for example, locations and suitability of accesses to and from the expressway, for example, proximity of infrastructure, stormwater, wastewater, water supply. Those are things which will become more apparent over time and will be able to be dealt with in a detailed way at the next stage, which would be a plan change for live zoning. And then again at the development and subdivision consent stage. So a number of the items under criteria list A and criteria list B, I've made notes there that these are things which really need to be addressed at a bit later stage in the process when there is more information available and when a specific development and subdivision proposal is formulated. Now, the essence of the submitter's proposition to you really is that the property economics report, it outlines a few crucial factors in the absence of a current capacity assessment. The most recent one you've really got is 2021 for business. There's something being developed soon, but property economics have been tasked with giving a more focused snapshot for the area in this part of the Waikato at present. And what they've said is really that the last work that has been done for future proof is overly optimistic in terms of capacity for a range of reasons, including uncertainty about landowner intentions, a range of factors that are outlined in that report. And if you haven't had a chance to read that property economics report yet, I'd ask you to please do that. So the first issue that they raise is some over-optimism in terms of capacity and an understatement in terms of demand. And they've justified those conclusions in the report by looking at the actual uptake of industrial land and the relevant catchment during the past 3-year period. And the conclusions that they've drawn is that there's a substantial understatement of the demand running alongside a substantial over-optimism about capacity and indicating a need to find some industrial development opportunity in the near future. And I'm sure this isn't the first time you've had somebody making that proposition to you today and even at other times in the past couple of years. What you've got here is a parcel of land that's signalled already in Waikato 2070 as being appropriate for industrial development in the current period, that is 2023 through to 2033. So it was 3 years to 10 years from 2020. We're in that period now, and we're urging the Future Proof Committee to match up future proof development recognition with Waikato 2070, to hold that same vision for the future for development at Taupiri. And what I expect has happened with Waikato 2070 in response to a lot of serious work done by Mr. Van Dam and others 4 or 5 years ago, is to recognise the importance and the influence of that expressway on Taupiri as a key hub, and that's for industry and business and for residential activity to go alongside that. And there are the proposals, some of them accepted already in the Waikato District Plan Review process for residential, some that are gaining traction and working their way towards resolution, we believe, for both residential and industrial. And now we're trying to match up what's in future proof with what's in Waikato 2070 to get that available land to the east into the picture. Without that being in future proof growth scenario, it gets difficult to get that through a plan change process to zone it, even though it's in Waikato 2070. The major advantage you've got with that land is you've got a willing developer who's looking to actively promote this as an industrial growth area, with further residential growth areas coming along on the other side of the expressway. And then in terms of versatility of industrial activity, got the opportunity on that eastern block to have something in the nature of heavier industry where it's separated from the residential areas by the expressway and by State Highway 1. You've got it alongside farmland to the east where there's no question of reverse sensitivity effects there. A good location, you might think, for a heavier industrial development. So you've got serious questions about supply and demand, a willing landowner who's looking to actively develop this, recognition of that land in Waikato 2070 for this type of future development, and the need, we believe, to match that up in the future-proof growth scenario. And the considerations for out of sequence and unanticipated development, they are addressed in that paper. I don't think there's real value in me marching through those. They're readable at any point. There can be additional information, I understand, provided between now and when you have your deliberations. And we would very much appreciate it if we could get a feel during any questions now as to what you think might be of additional help during that period to assist with your deliberations. Rudy, are there other things that I've missed that I should address or that you want to address? Got question time still? I think I've gone on a bit long.
It's all right. Well, if I'll kick off. I have a couple of questions. So, and I understand, Phil, clearly that whilst it's the subject lands identified in Waikato 2070, and it's not zoned through the district plan, but is there any reference or notation in the district plan that refers to this or this subject site, or is there nothing at all?
I've seen nothing. Michael's telling me nothing, but equally the same about the land on the western side, which has been rezoned. It's now referred to obviously because it's been given a live zoning, but also the other areas that are signalled in Waikato 2070 for residential and industrial. No specific reference in this land is no in that regard.
Second question, in terms of the time frame, so the land on the east, it's got a 3 to 10 years. The bottom purple area has got 10 to 30. So I was just interested in terms of, on the face of it, you think, well, why wouldn't that be 3 to 10? And then if the land on the east has a longer time frame, but does that relate to the heavy industrial proposition? So I'd just be interested in some clarification on the timeframes.
That is one thing that I did miss. That I had planned to speak to that. There is split ownership on the western side of the expressway for that industrial land, partly owned by Mr. Van. I'm advised there's less certainty about the current willingness of the other landowners to get on the western side. Mr. Van Dam, where his land is partly within 10 years, and I think maybe in that he's keen to go, but there's certainty about the timing of development, and I think it has been in that southern portion.
Okay. No,
Could I just add one?
yes, you can.
also there needs to be a little bit of clarity of difference between the two industrial zones. So the Western Industrial Zone is a general industrial. So we'd be quite picky as to who would set up shop there because of the close proximity to the residential area. The prevailing winds come from the west, so the industrial cluster on the east could be of a heavy industrial nature, open to everybody, basically. Where you wouldn't get that contamination from smells, vibrations, noises, and the like, drifting over to the residential area. So they're quite distinct in character, the two industrial zones.
Okay, no, thank you. David?
Just in the comment, and we've heard it a few times today, it's right next to the expressway, so good to go from a transport point of view. You'll be well aware that interchange is in no way, nor is 1B, suitable for a lot of heavy traffic. So I'm interested in and without getting into Phil's trap about getting too far down the kind of detail of a development, I'm interested in broadly what your thinking is from an access and upgrade point of view. There's no way you're sticking a whole lot of heavy vehicles around those roundabouts in their current form. I wouldn't have thought.
I'll attempt to give a response. I agree, and I guess, and I touched on this when I briefly spoke. I would anticipate that any future structure plan or precinct planning investigations would obviously involve discussions with the Transport Agency, and in my experience, there are mechanisms through precinct plans that can look at transportation triggers that mean that certain things have to occur before urbanisation can occur. And that's quite a common approach. And so you can have mechanisms that typically when you come to do your subdivision, you have to do certain things. Those things might be putting in infrastructure, but it might also be that you need to do certain transport upgrades. Now, typically you would expect that the landowner would cover the costs of those upgrades to any type of access that needs to be enhanced to the network. And those costs sometimes are not insignificant. And I guess to add to that, that sometimes reinforces that need when you're looking at that kind of cumulative urban approach. It's helpful to have some critical mass in terms of site area to be able to justify those upgrades.
So is it fair to say you haven't got that far and you're thinking about what that might look like yet? I mean, regrettably, they weren't upgraded when the expressway went through. In a perfect world, they would be huge. And
yeah, no, we haven't. But yeah. I'm simply making the point that there are and there should be mechanisms that would pick those aspects up, because ultimately those are costs that the developer would have to meet.
Yeah, couple. Thank you.
Okay, Carolyn.
Thank you. Thank you for your submission. And I certainly acknowledge the fact that it was it's been identified in Waikato 2070, which is well informed. Now, my question, you've spoken a lot about the benefit of, and it's a matter of timing. You've spoken much about the benefit of us future-proof identifying this land, industrial. What are the potential risks or unintended consequences of not identifying it?
That a demonstrated need for further industrial land spread amongst a number of different centres doesn't get met. Maybe a situation where there's difficulty with some of the other identified land being developed as has been hoped for, and it just may be that what we believe is an existing shortage of industrial land will continue to get to a more and more difficult stage in future.
Perhaps if I could add a supplementary comment, just I endorse what Phil said, but I also think at a strategic level, having a clear identification of available vacant industrial land, one sends a clear message spatially about where that land should be going, and also indirectly, I guess, resists that potential for other people to perhaps source land that's maybe not quite fit for purpose, but to kind of run that argument, well, council, you haven't provided sufficient land, this bit of land, it's near enough is good enough. I think it then gives you a really clear strategic direction that you have provided for and enabled industrial land. And that, I think, hopefully means that you don't potentially get less opportunities for people to run arguments at the periphery, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your submission presentation. In terms of the actual delivery, I'm interested in, once say it was you were successful in rezoning the land, what kind of resource do you have available to it, and I guess background in terms of development to actually deliver an industrial area?
I think I'll get Mr. Keane to talk to that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It would be very much a partnership approach with the current landowners joining in with another developer or development company to do the delivery. The team in front of you has extensive experience with planning processes such as this, and I have extensive experience with the full life cycle of development. And so would be seeing it through all the way. But in terms of that horsepower you're talking about, cash,
Yes.
yeah, will come via a JV partner in the future.
So far, not identified. And had some questions on transport, and I acknowledge your points around, there's still work to do in terms of infrastructure, but what is the early thinking in terms of what is infrastructure?
Sorry, just the last bit of the question, was it water?
Yeah.
Yeah. So through our appeal process to the district plan for the Western land, we've identified the opportunities and constraints, and so there is capacity for sewer and capacity for water. However, the delivery or the connection over to the Taupiri East Industrial Cluster would have to go under or over or through the motorway, which is a challenge that we've identified. And then in terms of stormwater, very much a water sensitive kind of stormwater approach with dealing with it on site, mimicking the natural features of the current status quo.
There's a lot of gullies.
There is.
Presumably fairly sensitive areas.
Correct. Retained and enhanced, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just also add on to that then? The topography of the Eastern Industrial Park is by and large 80% pretty flat. It's southernmost area, a little bit of rolling activity, where on its and pretty much on its eastern boundary, you have a corridor of the Mangitoki stream system. So the land from the expressway actually goes uphill to a ridge, where then it drops quite steeply down to the Mangitoki stream system. Hence, that's why there's a gully there. But the natural fall of most of that land falls away from it. So it actually falls towards the motorway, where it would then be collected and managed properly before it released back into the stream system, obviously. That cluster of land that you mentioned before on the western side of the motorway, so the southernmost piece of that purple industrial identified land, the topography there is such that only perhaps a third of that, or maybe half of that land would be actually acceptable to be developed for industrial because of the topography being quite steep and hilly and gullyish and wetland and so forth. So whereas on that eastern part, most of it is actually a very good contour.
Just a couple of things I'd just like to highlight at the commencement of today's hearing. Robert outlined that we're still waiting on for the final business assessment work to be produced by the consultant. Once that arrives, it's intended to send that out to all submitters to then request any written comments on that. So that's a further opportunity in terms of feeding back any views around that assessment. And that process is to occur obviously prior to the panel undertaking deliberations, which will be in the first week of May. So there is that opportunity to come. If in terms of the preparation of the reports to the panel, the team need any further information, they will obviously seek that within a particular time frame. But I wanted to check with panel members, given those processes will happen, whether you require any further information from your perspective. If you don't, that's fine. If you do, it's just an opportunity to highlight it why we've gathered. But certainly the team will be following up, and obviously the business assessment process will provide that opportunity for anything else in respect of that work to come back for our consideration. No, there don't appear to be anything. So you will hear from the team in due course with that assessment and that request for written input.
Thank you, panel members, and thanks for your consideration. Really
Okay,
appreciate
no,
it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good. 401, I see Fraser, you're here ready to present your client's submission. So you have a member of your team online. Okay, so just in terms of the process, you've been, as with other submitters, 20 minutes. Leah will ring the bell at 10 minutes. That's just an indication that you may want to leave a bit of time towards the end for any questions that members may have. Otherwise, and for members, submission 47 on page 371 of our agenda. So otherwise, Fraser, I'll hand over to you, and if you can introduce your team and then take us through the submission. Oh, can you turn on your microphone, please?
I'll just connect to the internet and I'll let my team introduce themselves, but I'm Fraser McNutt from Barkers, my planner representing the SL1 consortium.
Kia ora, I'm Robert Dole from Collier's Project Leaders. I'm the client representative for the consortium of landowners of SL1.
Good afternoon, Cameron Under from BBO Consultants, involved in the transportation work for SL1.
And your colleague online?
Dean Morris.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Dean Morris from Maven Waikato, and I'm a civil engineer doing the infrastructure for SL1.
No, thank you. Over to you, Fraser.
Okay, thank you. In terms of our presentation, I'm just going to make some highlights our submission to the panel, and then we have some plans to run through with the panel. That's up on the screen, and then Rob Dole will give some feedback from central government that we've been working with, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay, no, thank you.
So in terms of our submission, it's quite simple for us. What we're after, we're seeking to become an urban enablement area. It is what we sought last time we were in front of the panel. We have made some progress in terms of what the decisions were, further investigations to occur in the SL1 area. We want recognition that we can provide for both industrial and residential in this area as well. We would like the work that we have done to be acknowledged in terms of deep peat and mudfish that have come up on the assessment that we've seen. Work that we have done has indicated, yes, there is some deep peat, but we're talking about an area of 500 hectares. So we have done some work to accurately display areas of peat that you can work with, and in our view, that's 2 metres and under, which is a large portion of the site, and then the balance, yes, would be deemed deep peat. Mudfish, to our knowledge, to date, we're not aware of any, but having done work on greenfield areas in this catchment, particularly in the wet peat areas, yes, there may be a chance, but that is something that I would say requires further assessment as well. Not too much ephemeral habitat on site. It's relatively flat. So that's something that we would like acknowledged in the assessment as well. Milestones to date, been working well with Hamilton City Council. We have an MOU with them that sets out a process with them on how one may bring in this land to be a part of the city. Part of the MOU works towards establishing a boundary agreement, which we now have with the neighbours at Waipa and Hamilton City. So that is sitting there as well. So that's some progress that we have made. We've also done a lot of work since we last saw you in terms of simply investigation in all areas that would inform an MCA, so multi-criteria analysis if you were to do one. Full structure plan, concept plan, staging, 3 waters, transportation, the list goes on. We'll display some of that work with you shortly. Some key strategic observations I just wanted to make. Like I said, 500 hectares of land with circa 70-75% current representation in the consortium. That is growing. Provides, obviously, to deal with the housing shortfall that's specific to Hamilton City and the obvious industrial shortfall as well. There's a 66% demand increase in getting these stats straight out of the HBA. Over the long term, we note the 20% margin, that your competitive margin. We note that there's a 15% competitive margin over the long term, so we're querying that. We're also highlighting that the 20% is not a ceiling, so we'll just make that comment as well. The HBA indicates its largest shortfalls around the value of $500,000 to $800,000 in terms of delivering for affordable housing. That is a sweet spot that, in our view, the SL1 land, and to be fair, greenfield land has the ability to provide for on scale and a mass. It's a lot harder to develop that sort of delivery of 500 to 800 at scale in the infill and ad hoc, in our view. We have proven developers that make up the SL1 consortium. So these are not just small landowners that want to sell on to developers. We actually have developers. We want to develop the land. Like I say, we can deliver housing and industrial. We've got sequential staging that would follow, like I say, an MCA process if you were to look at SL1 in isolation. So essentially what I'm saying is the staging makes sense. It's the most affordable. It takes account of topography, connectivity, accessibility, key transportation links. It's location friendly in our view. It tidies off the southern end of the city in conjunction with Peacocks. The rail is there, state highways are there, the airport is there. It's accessible to the CBD, which isn't quite the same for the northern growth cells in our view. Greenfield development, it obviously provides for density and it will prioritise bus use. Cam will get on in touch with this a bit more. We're not proposing your traditional development with a garage with 2 cars. We're proposing a development that would work with the metro spatial plan. Look to reduce that reliance on cars, look to build on that 70% target. And again, in our view, this is something that could be delivered at scale with large, accessible greenfield areas. Specifically RT4 in the metro spatial plan I'm referring to, and again, Cam can elaborate on that. I'll stop there and hand over to Rob for a minute or two before we jump into the maps.
Hi everyone. Look, the owners of SL1, I've been working heavily, and also some of you are aware I represent TPL also, who's presenting tomorrow. There's about 1,500 hectares of landowners up and down Southern Links corridor that will enable future employment and residential enablement. In relation to SL1, we've had discussions with the current government, with a number of ministers regarding Southern Links, and obviously the GPS was announced and Southern Links is considered a strategic road to enable urban development. That's a lot of that I think has to do with the work we've been doing with them. So we are having active conversations. We are aware of the fast track legislation, but we want to work with future-proof partners to enable the cost boundary and integrated discussions to create and enhance a better long-term biodiversity, ecological outcomes, which respond to climate change, environmental issues and affordability. We do think the development and enablement of SL1 through key infrastructure along with new and emerging growth cells of Peacocks and SL1 will enable regeneration of lower socioeconomic areas of Glenview, Deanwell, Melville, Fitzroy and Bader Street. We are positive we'll be able to work with Waka Kotahi and with the government around Southern Links. So yeah, we're very keen to continue our dialogue. Also, we've just submitted an emerging areas ROI with Hamilton City with 5 emerging growth areas in Hamilton. So we've lodged a significant pack with them last Friday.
Thanks, Rob. Okay. Do I have control of this or someone else got control?
Leah does.
Okay, cool. So I'll just speak to the screen. So this is the SL1 area, so south of Hamilton. I think hopefully we all know where that is. Okay, next. So the dotted line there, sorry, was the Southern Links designation. Okay, next slide. So we'll go through these quite quickly. Again, everyone in the room should be familiar. Just that's the emerging areas work we've been doing with HCC. The southern one, so next slide. That's land ownership. So the call that blue, the lighter colour. That's our ownership, and we're working with the green areas, the lifestyle block owners in Hutchison Road, and the Ford's property, the industrial area to the north there. So we're working closely with them. But again, that indicates a significant representation of the landowners. Next slide. Carry on. Again, just indicating its regional context. That's basically indicating where that northern Tarapa industrial node and how it continues south. And we're looking to maintain that through the Harrison block and the Stride block for industrial. Next slide. Again, local context, where Peacocks is. My comment, it just balances nicely. State Highway 3 inside the designation. Next slide. Planning context, so it's Waipa land currently. We've got rural and the Finlay block. I think that's rural lifestyle. Next slide. Social amenities, we'll just keep going through these. That's just giving you a spatial analysis of what's existing in relation to the SL1. Next slide. Open space, I think we're going with I think there are 800 and 400 metre catchment areas. Would look to maintain that and build on that in the growth cell. Next slide. Accessibility, access to employment. I guess to just reiterate the close proximity from a spatial context in terms of the CBD and employment. It's not on the east side, so the bridges are not so much of an issue for us. And we've got one coming our way soon as well. Accessibility analysis, so again, darker, high accessibility, again, closer to the CBD, indicating that. Next slide. Highly productive, LUC2, yes, that's there. HPL is an issue. The bit that abuts State Highway 3 is obviously more sloping topography, so that's not LUC.
Also, a number of those farms get cut in half with Southern Links, and so they won't be workable farms. So that's a piece of work we need to go through yet, but the viability of some of those farms is going to be affected with Southern Links.
And with the shortfall in the HPA, that provides a pathway 3.6 of the HPL, the NPS. So that's something that we can use as assistance. Next slide. Pete, so we mentioned we've actually done a bit more mapping with CPT. So the lighter colour, essentially the lighter brown, is workable peat. And the darker brown is, we can call that deep peat or greater than 2 metres. So we can work with all of that light stuff, whether that be preloading or just digging it out. Dean, have you got any more comments on the peat?
Yeah, also the stuff over 2 metres, there's workable solutions for that as well. So, yeah.
Yep. Okay, next slide. All good. Hazards, so flooding as it is. Again, that steeper topography is on the right there, but it's pretty flat. But again, greenfield land, so this can all be worked with. I'll touch on that with our stormwater. Let me get to that. Next one, please. Natural hazards, again. Oh, sorry, that previous one I think was topography. This is the natural hazards of flooding. Next one. Bats and mudfish. So we're fully aware of what's going on. Peacocks. There's, other than the porter's land, there's not a lot of trees. It's basically bare farmland with farm drains in it. I touched on the mudfish. There are opportunities to deal with those. We're dealing with them in road carry, whether that's offsetting, relocation. But we are looking, you'll see with our structure plan, to maintain and enhance waterways as they are. Next one. So this is the indicative concept plan. Pebbles industrial, the rest is residential. You're seeing stormwater ponds and subcatchments that relate to the Mungo Tukutuku ICMP. You're seeing, like I said, existing streams, drains maintained. There's a strategic approach to this concept plan, and we'll get into that in a bit more detail. Next one. Cam, I'll get you to, don't mind, speak to the concept plan and roading.
Okay, so this is a concept plan of the roading. We've got the spine road from Saxby's, more or less parallel with the Southern Links alignment, potentially joining into the new roundabout down at Range Road, which is, I understand, due to be constructed in September this year. So that would be a fourth arm off that. We've also shown indicatively a roundabout on Southern Links, direct to that. There is, in our view, a need to have access both directly to the employment zone, but also to relieve all pressure or some pressure off Ohaupo Road. The two key enablers really, well, one of the critical aspects of transport infrastructure will be in future the rapid transit network, which the MSP talks about, and in particular the RT4 network, which I note that the MSPs talks about the need for a highly accessible, transformative RTN network, but then it also talks about RT4, which services Melville, may not have the density needed for full rapid transit. So we're proposing that this level of density would actually really enable RT4 to be actual rapid transit, quite accessible from this site. That's probably the two key. Yep.
Thanks, Cam. Next one, please. Again, that's probably just, touching on what Cam said there, but whether we have a minor arterial through the spine road, Cam, or a collector, we have options. I just want everyone to remember too, there's 500 hectares, which I'll show you staging for just a moment. Next slide. Open space, so like I said, we're looking for those sort of 400 to 800 metre catchments. As sites are developed, there will be, we would ensure that there's open space, good connectivity, walking and cycling, that realign and follow the streams, and would make dual use of those stormwater lands as well for open space. Next slide. Dean, can you just talk us through high level, please, on our infrastructure approach?
Yeah, so infrastructure, stormwater ponds at the bottom of the catchments for the certain areas. In terms of wastewater, there's actually a future southern wastewater treatment plant planned by Hamilton City Council, which in long-term solution will connect into there. Ideally would connect into existing infrastructure for wastewater, but that's obviously up to Hamilton City Council. And the same with water. Ideally, we'd hook into their infrastructure as well. But we have interim solutions to be able to open the land for development whilst upgrades are taking place on those three waters.
Thanks, Dean. Next slide. Just run you through our staging. So I mentioned, I probably didn't mention 9,300 houses is what we think we could realistically provide for when you take into account net developable areas, stormwater ponds, roads. We've done all of that work, so that is a realistic number. And you can see that we won't go through it line by line, but you've got densities, you've got staging, you've got land areas, you've got net developable areas. We're working off MPS, UD densities, like I said, trying to target that 500 to 800k margin. Our staging is indicative of 1A, 1B up north there with the existing roading connections. And then we move down to the 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D. The F stands for future. So you're never going to develop all of this in one go, but you'd need to get it going and you need to stage it and have development and infrastructure triggers accordingly. That detail comes through your plan change process. Next slide. So the northern block, we had a southern and northern block, we just split it up. And so that provides for your industrial, and that's the Rogerson's block to the top there, the 3A, 3B. That's residential. So we'd have your typical, your buffers and amenity protection areas between the transition of zones. Next slide. So this is stage 1A, stage 1B, just in a bit more detail, just to give you an idea of realistically what you might get. Stormwater. It's a big issue. Obviously, we need to treat and discharge. We're looking for betterment before that goes into the downstream catchments, but it's quite land hungry as a road, so we have to make good use of the land, and that's why the densities are what they are. That's a roading network that could work. This is not a resource consent. This is not a plan change. This is to give you an idea of indicatively what you would be looking at and what sort of development blocks and what those would look like. Next slide. Industrial, we haven't gone to any more details than that. That follows largely the land ownership boundaries. But yeah, I can't see what that is. I think it's 64 odd hectares, 68 net. And that Southern Link's running through the middle there, just to give you an idea. So in our view, we'd be looking to get away an element of industrial and residential in stage 1. And the rest we can discuss with the panel, partners and the councils and iwi. Next slide. That's it.
Okay, thank you. open up for questions from members. Oh. Don't appear to be any. Oh, I was waiting for you. It's David.
I know Sarah would have some about public transport. I actually don't have a question, just an observation that's very, very thorough. There's a lot to take in. It's a long way from where we last heard from you, so catch pie in that respect, but yeah, there's a bit to take in. I guess the comment I would make is, yes, GPS has identified Southern Links, roads of national significance, but the GPS has also acknowledged that for the next 3 years, there's no money to do any actual building. It's all about design and what have you. So there's a fair bit of water to go under the bridge there, which you guys are obviously well aware of. And the form and function reviews made the comment and the observation that, and I made this observation earlier, there's a bit of horse before cart or cart before horse, I'm not sure, but that the land use form needs to inform what this part of Southern Links looks like, because if we put a 4-lane state highway through here, your roundabout, for example, ain't going to be a roundabout. But equally, is that going to serve the best purpose for what the most logical land use is for this place? 4-lane highway, maybe not. Well, maybe, but yeah, I don't know if you need to comment too much on that. I'm just highlighting that there's a bit of water to go under the bridge there, and I think this is helpful from that respect.
Hey, there's nothing further. I would like to reiterate David's comments just in terms of the last time, in terms of the hearing and the work and the thinking that's gone into what you've presented. So very fair to acknowledge that effort and that work. So it's certainly very helpful for our considerations over the next few weeks. Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Acknowledge the work of the team. Very good. So that completes the hearing of submitters today. I'm proposing that we don't deal with the out of sequence report until tomorrow, given we've got we're down 2 in terms of Liz and Sarah. So we'll come back to that sometime tomorrow, depending on the timing. And if we don't have anything during the day, our last, it's the staff submission from the SDS team at 2:50. So we'll look at considering the report around that time. Otherwise, Robert, anything you'd like to add at this point before I adjourn? Oh, do you? Okay. So, Denai, would you like to do a closing karakia for us?
I have to say I had an easy day today. I read a lot of the documents and they had already put it in, so I didn't have to ask the questions. So I hope tomorrow's going to be the same. Nō reira, tēnā koutou. Ria te rangi tūnei tue te pape takato. Tue ngā tangata kua wehi atu. Ki te pō uri, ki te pō tangata. I te pō hei o te atu ai. Mai aroha ki a rātou. Haere koutou, mai I rote te ariki. Turi e whakamauna ki a tīna. Omi e hui e tai kia. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. So we will see you at 9 a.m. in the morning. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.